We're back. You are chatting with John P. Today, we are going to be talking about 6 watches that are cheap but get respect from watch collectors. Now, I will say that I enjoy watches of all different types, sizes, uses, colors, brands, and sometimes even price point. Now, I do have my favorites, and I do have the luxury of having Del Rey Watch with delreywatch.com, where I get to play around with and also acquire watches at extremely favorable prices. But previously, especially earlier on in my watch collecting history, I would look for some really great bargains. And there's some things on this list, including what I have on my wrist right now, which I'll show to you when the timing is right, that are extremely affordable, but also I'm finding out as time goes on, they receive a lot of respect from a lot of watch collectors. Now, I won't say that every watch collector is going to respect all of them, because as we know, there are just some people in watches that sometimes approach it with a high level of snobbery. Now, that's not everyone. Mostly people, especially in the comments below, I go through all of them. Most people, they really do appreciate watches at all different levels and price points. And that's what I really enjoy about watches, is that you can get into some of these watches here at approachable price points and still kind of be part of that watch collector, watch geek community. And so whether you're just starting out or that just might be what you're willing to spend on the watch, you can still have fun and you can still relate to others. And I think that's probably the coolest thing about that. And also, we just switched up some things on our website at Del Rey Watch, so I'd love to hear your feedback and any suggestions on the website in the comments below. I would appreciate it. So let's start right off. Now, I'm going to start off with a watch that is at the high end of the spectrum, and many people would not consider this cheap, though I think that in terms of affordable watches, this is probably one to either strive towards or start off with, just depending where you're at, your age, career, etc. But this is going to be the Nomos Club. Now, the retail on the lowest price Nomos Club, the Club Campus, I believe right now is around $1,500 US for the 36 millimeter Alpha movement in-house caliber manual wind watch from Nomos, but you can get them on eBay, Chrono24, some other places for under $1,000. And when we consider true kind of geek watches, we talk about in-house calibers, finely decorated, having movements that are rock solid, workhorse movements, and still having that refinement, and also looking at the dials. And I would say that when it comes to affordable, approachable watches, if you're really starting out or you're at the point where you're looking for a good watch that fits those criteria, at that $1,000 and under price point, between $800 and $1,000, I've seen them go for. The Nomos Club or the Club Campus is a no-brainer in a place that I really think starts getting into serious watches that will even attract the attention of some very snobby watch collectors as well. So I like that for so many reasons. But when we talk about this watch, we're talking, the watch is adjusted at 6 positions. It's finely decorated. It has a 43-ish hour power reserve, and it has that alpha caliber in-house movement. And that's something you don't get from any other brand at that price point. Everything across the board is just extraordinary. So that one I started out with, but it's a little bit of a bonus watch because at the end of the day, it's really not that cheap. But next we have the Casio GShock. Now, this watch is iconic and it's just quintessential sports watch. Many people, including in the comments and on the forums and people that I meet, whether they have a Longunzona or Patek Philippe or FP Journe in their collection, oftentimes you still see a G-Shock or 2 G-Shocks, and it's really amazing to see, right? We're talking about quartz-driven watches that are chunky, modern, bold, sometimes in bright fluorescent colors, and it's the complete opposite of what you would experience from a high-end watch, but it offers so many other things that high-end watches just typically don't, unless we're getting into some kind of quirky Hublot models or some other more avant-garde brands or models. When we're talking about the Casio GShock, this thing can survive absolute beatings, and I think that's why a lot of watch collectors are drawn to it, because it has a very clearly defined place in a collection, a watch that you can whip against the wall, throw it off your roof, do anything to it, hold a Zippo lighter to it for 20 minutes, and it's probably still going to run. And I think that's why it's just such a no-brainer. And these things, depending on the model, can be probably as cheap as $80, maybe upwards of a few hundred, give or take. They have so many variations, but the Casio GShock is a no-brainer, I think, for someone that wants a watch that fits that perfect mold of sports, rugged, durable, without branching out into other things that it knows it probably shouldn't. It knows its place, it serves it very well, and that's why it gets the respect from watch collectors. Next, we have the Hamilton Khaki. Now, this watch, the retails are a little bit higher, but you can see these things $300 to $350. At the gray market, pre-owned a little bit less, sometimes even lower on places like eBay. And when we're considering that these watches are in line with some watches that are $1,000, $1,500, they're Swiss watches, they're going to have either ETA or Sellita depending when you're buying the watch. So similar movements that you're going to see in even some entry-level examples from the Tag Heuers or the IWCs and many of the other brands, and certainly most of the micro brands that offer Swiss automatic movements. And so when we're talking about a few $100 watch, and it does have a name that has really withstood the test of time, you know, especially in American heritage, it's really a no-brainer. And so if you're at that price point, you will get a nod from collectors at different levels and different tiers and watches, because yes, you could have purchased, you know, a quartz watch. You could have purchased, what do you call those watches? The movement watches. You could have purchased quite literally any other watch for the same price, but you knew enough to go and be part of the watch community and get yourself an automatic watch. And that's why it gets the respect in that category. And spec for spec, pretty close, if not similar to, admittedly, some entry-level offerings from brands like IWC. That's a whole nother conversation for a whole nother time about, you know, whether or not I think that the brands like IWC should do things like that. There's some differences, decoration and some changing of parts, but generally you're getting something very similar in terms of the actual mechanics. But we'll save that for another video. Next, we have vintage mechanical watches. Now, on my wrist today, you know, I'm actually practicing what I preach, and that's what I do here on this channel, and of course at delraywatch.com. I have, let me see if I can get a little focus. We have a Girard Perregaux Seahawk in gold. This one is actually in fabulous condition. I've owned this watch for about 10 years now. I think I paid, I can't even remember, but it was much lower than the Hamilton, and vintage watches back then were completely off the radar. They've picked up a little bit, but you can score some watches on eBay, the forums, Chrono24, even sometimes through us at Del Rey for a few $100s or less. Mechanical Swiss watches from brands like Girard Perregaux or even Omega dress watches and some of the others. Now, not Patek Philippe or Vacheron or probably also not JLC, but some of the other lesser known or less desirable brands. You pick these things up, a vintage watch, it's mechanical, and watch collectors and buffs look at it and they're like, wow, this person, you know, they put in the homework, they went on the hunt, they went on the chase. And if you get a good example, that gets even more, it gets even more compliments than if you were just to pick up, you know, whatever modern watch du jour that happens to be the hot micro brand of the time. And so watch collectors like to see that, and especially vintage watch guys. While snobbery does exist in vintage, you have this interesting additional camaraderie that comes with having vintage watches, because it's a different ball game. It's a different thing. It's more about the hunt. It's kind of like antiques or art. You might know what you're looking for. You're hunting, and you know they don't need to know that you were hunting it because of you know, the most attractive price. Perhaps you were hunting it because you wanted that specific model, and that's vintage in a nutshell. So vintage mechanical watches, these I cannot recommend these enough when looking for a cheap or an affordable watch and you're willing to accept nuances that come with vintage. And I've made other videos about vintage nuances. I'm a vintage watch guy myself. Really enjoy it because of that hunt and chase. I'll make another video talking about it in the future, but in the back catalog, I do have a video explaining that. Next, we have one to really get the Seiko fanboy juices flowing. That's the Seiko SKX lineup. Now, in recent times, the SKX new has kind of gone on the back burner or from gray market, because Seiko has been coming out with just so many cool new offerings that have really attracted the Seiko fans. But the SKX had such a long run of being an iconic, affordable workhorse, everyday, bang 'em up and beat 'em up watch. And that's why it gets so many compliments and nods from watch collectors, is that whether you're just starting out or you've been collecting for 50 years, there's a decent chance you've owned an SKX, thought about it, or have one in your rotation, or maybe several in your rotation. And so I see SKXs on the wrists of people, once again, that wear Journes, and it serves that place and purpose. You know, you can't really go swimming, or would you really want to, with a Journe, but when you're talking about, you know, something that you're comfortable with and maybe can toss and get a new one in a few years if there's issues, you can do that. And that's where the SKX lies. And I also did videos about this in the past, so this one, no brainer, always gets respect from watch collectors. Maybe not always, but a lot of the time, certainly more than most. Next and lastly, we will finish up with the Swatch System 51. Now, I remember when this watch came out and was unveiled a handful of years back. This model is not that new. I think maybe 5 to 7 years old at this point, maybe 7 or 8. Time is really just flying by, but certainly within the last decade, the more recent part of the last decade, this watch came out. And the big thing about this watch is that it's an automatic watch that is totally Swiss, totally produced by Swatch, and I think when they came out, they were about $150, depending on the model, give or take. It's in that range, some a little bit higher. I think pre-owned, you can find them probably $90. And the downside is these watches are not serviceable. Everything about this watch is made by machines and robots. So the case is totally enclosed and hermetically sealed. I owned a Swatch System 51. I actually gave it away to, I had a little I don't want to call it a sweepstakes. I did this thing, I don't know the legal jargon, but I did this thing on my channel about a year ago where I gave it away. Maybe I'll give away another one in the future. If that's something you think I should do, leave in the comments below. But I really liked it. You know, it was nice. It worked very well. You wound it backwards, which was interesting. And the movement was very nice and specific to that watch. And so they had some funky designs and cool. And once again, the whole premise behind that model, much like the others on the list, is it shows other watch collectors, it signals to them that you did your homework and you went out of your way to go for something that was Swiss made, well made, automatic, mechanical wristwatch. And that's something that does not get delivered to you when you go for like a fashion watch or something, where typically people will say, oh, that's an interesting watch, and they'll look at it, and then a watch collector will say, wow, you know, you ended up getting a a Dolce & Gabbana gold-plated Chinese, quartz-driven watch. And so it's the complete opposite of that. And I found that seems to be something that a lot of watch collectors really gravitate towards. You know, part of that community of having mechanical watches, the whole process, the procedure, even if you're not totally into it, nonetheless, it gets the respect. And I'm not, totally ripping on other watches outside of mechanical watches or Swiss watches. If you also enjoy those, totally up to you. Though what I did here is I supplied some cheap or affordable watches that I see get respect from watch collectors that oftentimes have much more pricier and much more sophisticated watches also in their collection. But once again, as always, I would love to hear about the watches that you have that you consider affordable and you respect or others respect in the comments below. And now that I think about it, if there's also any watches that are kind of weird or quirky or off the beaten path that you also get the most compliments on, but you never really thought it would happen, I would love to hear that in the comments below. And a follow-up to the last video about the watch that I'm going to buy in the future, I'm still thinking about it. I'm still tallying the votes, so make sure to put in your last minute votes there. Anyway, guys, it's Friday. Hopefully everyone has a great weekend. I'm going to get back to finishing up some things here at the office so I can relax just a little bit, and we'll see you next time. You have been chatting with John P. Ciao.